Joining us on the phones right now, Republican strategist Matt Mackowiak. Matt, good morning. How are you today?
Doing great, Chad.
Thanks
How are you?
Yeah, I'm doing great. Thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it. I want to start off. Earlier today, I had the chairwoman of the RNC, Ronna McDaniel, on the show. And, of course, we talked about the rise of socialism on the left and what that would mean for the country. But we also talked about the focus of Texas and the focus of the RNC on Texas. There was a story, I'm sure you saw it, from the Dallas Morning News, Gomer Jeffries, who wrote about how Texas it could be the biggest battleground state in 2020. Obviously, she's traveling in Texas right now, the RNC chairwoman. She's calling into this radio show. To me, there appears to be a big focus on Texas from the RNC, and much bigger than we've seen in the past. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, and I think the state party and the state chairman, James Dickey, have been clear that they do believe Texas can be far more competitive in 2020 than it's been in a couple decades. And I think the potential for that is certainly there. I mean, we don't know if Beto O'Rourke or Julian Castro on which line could perhaps be on the national ticket. I think the odds of either one are fairly low, but obviously if that were to happen, it would be a game changer. We don't know who the candidate on the Democratic side for U.S. Senate will be. We do know the Democrats are going to spend a lot of money, in 5 or 6 congressional races, and they're going to try to take the House back in Texas, which would have massive ramifications on redistricting, which would happen starting in January of 2021. So there's a lot at stake in Texas in 2020. I'm not yet at the point where I think Democrats really have a chance to flip it. But and of course, the big question is going to be, does the Democratic nominee for president really invest considerable resources in Texas in 2020? I generally am not convinced that's going to happen. Of course, it depends who the nominee is and what their path to 207 electoral votes is. I just think they're going to be the 2020 race is going to be about the Midwest. It's going to be about Michigan and Wisconsin and Pennsylvania far more than it's going to be about Texas. But I think the state party is smart, and Senator Cornyn is smart to prepare for the worst and then hope for the best. And obviously, everybody was woken up by Beto's very narrow loss to Ted Cruz. I do think that was a unique circumstance. And I don't know that I don't really think that's likely to be replicated. But you're right. I mean, look, the RNC, I think, is going to be more invested here financially in terms of ground game, in terms of data, in terms of a lot of areas. And the state party is trying to raise twice as much money, over the next 2 years as they did the past 2 years. And of course, Senator Cornyn recognizes that he's going to prepare for a tough race. So there's a lot happening. Exactly how competitive Texas will be statewide in 2020, I think, remains to be seen. Down ballot, related to U.S. Congress and the one competitive state Senate seat and 10 or 15 state House seats, I think it's going to be very, very competitive.
Yeah. Let's say Texas is competitive, and let's say the polling has Texas really close. It's a battleground state. How does that change the allocation of money and really what the RNC does nationally?
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem with Texas is it's just so expensive to compete statewide. I mean, you could fund 3 or 4 or 5 other battleground states for what it costs to compete in Texas. With Dallas and Houston being so expensive, but then you add Austin, San Antonio to that, and of course all the secondary and rural markets. I mean, it is an expensive place to compete, and so that to me, I think, is the biggest reason why the Democrats ultimately will not invest the $50 or $100 million that would be required to compete here. Compared to the other places where they could have passed the 270 electoral votes. Now, if they were to nominate someone who, for whatever reason, isn't competitive in the Midwest, maybe they look at Texas as more of a pathway. They try to put together Texas and Arizona and Nevada or something like that. But yeah, I mean, look, I think by June and perhaps July, we're going to have a pretty good sense what the battleground states are going to be. I mean, we haven't seen a lot of movement. I really think, as I said before, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania are where this whole ball game is going to be. If the Democrats can take 2 of those 3 away, they've taken Trump's path of 270 electoral votes away. Unless he adds in something else, and I think the only other states that he could add in would be Minnesota or Colorado. I think both of those are challenging. So. It's again going to depend a lot on who the Democrats nominate, what Trump's numbers look like, who the Democratic candidate for U.S. Senate is. There's a lot of variables still out there, but I'll be ultimately surprised if the Democrats do invest the $50 or $100 million it would take to be competitive here Keep in mind, last November they didn't have to invest anything. Beto went out and raised $80 million on his own. And so I think everyone's thinking, oh, well, if Beto ended at 2.5% behind Cruz, that's where everybody starts. And that's not where everybody starts in Texas.
Right.
That's just not how these things work. You start where you start, and you've got to go out and raise the money. And so I just think the Democratic nominee is not going to be able to be willing or able to make the investment that would be required.
You had Hickenlooper, who joined into the Democrat field of 78 Democrats, seemingly 78 Democrats, who are running. Does he fit in anywhere, or is he just running because he's got nothing else to do?
Yeah, I don't see much of a path there. I think he thought, well, there's really no governors running. Of course, Inslee from Washington got in the day before. Perhaps he thinks he can kind of be a Western candidate. Maybe he's looking at the cabinet or something, or even VP potentially. He's an interesting guy. He's been mayor of Denver for 2 terms and then governor of Colorado for 2 terms, was pretty popular when he left. He's actually fairly moderate. He was pretty pro-oil and gas in Colorado. It's hard for me to see how any analysis of the Democratic Party today would lead, Hickenlooper and his team to say, this is our time. He just doesn't seem like the right candidate at the right time, in the modern Democratic Party. Now, look, I think part of what's changed, and I think you and I have talked about this in the past, is the disincentives for running for president have never been lower. Right? Yeah. I mean, really it's just about not embarrassing yourself and not racking up a huge amount of debt. If you don't do those 2 things, then there's really no disincentive, right? You're going to raise your profile, meet a lot of donors, earn a lot of media, build your lists, and worst case scenario, you could end up being a cable news contributor or a member of the cabinet or who knows what going forward. So I just think that's part of why you're seeing so many candidates run. I also think that the Democrats believe that the nomination is worth having. I think they believe that almost any of their candidates can beat Trump, much like our Republican candidates thought 4 years ago when we thought that the country would swing back from Obama, which it did. So I think that's part of it too. They all think they can. If Trump did it, I can do it. I can catch lightning in a bottle. I think there's really only 4 or 5 people probably in the Democratic side who have a legitimate chance to be the nominee. But we also have to again see what happens. Does Biden get in? Does Mike Bloomberg get in? How does this field, take shape, and does purity or electability end up motivating Democratic primary voters? I think that's a big question. The NBC News Wall Street Journal poll on Sunday showed 56% would rather have a candidate that they agree with on issues than someone who would be a stronger candidate against Trump. So that would tend to signal that they're maybe more interested in purity. Has
Elizabeth Warren had the absolute worst rollout of what was expected to be a top-tier candidate?
Yeah, it's been pretty weak. I'm not quite sure what she's doing. She has still been able to get some crowds together. Doesn't seem to be getting much traction. Is raising less money than people thought she would. She's being sort of lapped by Bernie Sanders on fundraising. I think Bernie running is a real problem for her. I think they compete in the same lane for the same voters, the same activists, a lot of the same issues. And she's not. One of the things I was thinking about is one of the advantages Hillary had in the past 2 elections was that she was the only woman running on the Democratic side. And so people that wanted to see a female president or a female nominee could rally behind her. That's not an issue now, right? You've got 4 or 5 women running. And so that has not been an advantage, a competitive advantage for Elizabeth Warren. So I'm not really quite sure I guess if you want someone who's really going to go after the banks, she's probably the top candidate if that's your number one issue. Outside of that, I think she's kind of slipping into the second tier at this point, even though she still has massive lists and a lot of enthusiasm on the left. There are a lot of other candidates that have enthusiasm, too. It seems that she just doesn't have the candidate skills that some of the other first-tier candidates have.
Yeah, visiting with Matt Mackowiak. Matt, the House is opening up an obstruction probe. Many are saying that this is the beginning of impeachment proceedings for House Democrats. Do you agree with that?
I think that's their goal. I don't think that is in the cards in the short term. I think that the Democrats are preparing for, a Mueller report that's going to disappoint many, many people in the resistance. And so they are in a sort of search and destroy mode at this point. They're looking for new evidence, new lines of inquiry, new accusations they can make. This is not targeted investigations, right? Sending 81 subpoenas out in one day. I mean, that's not That's overly broad. Should be hard for them to defend. If they really have that many people that they want to talk to, they should do it 2 or 3 at a time and let people respond. And I think they realize the clock's ticking. It's not really ticking in this Congress because it's 2 years long and we're 3 months in, but it's ticking as it relates to the Mueller report, which could drop literally any day. It might even be already turned in to the Attorney General at this point. So, if you watch the Cohen hearing, they clearly are looking for new ways to attack the president politically, and this is all about reelection. It's about preventing him from being reelected. And so we'll see how the Trump administration and some of these individuals respond. But, Congress is on a fishing expedition, and they are casting a very wide net.
Yeah, I received your email newsletter just a few moments ago. Tell folks how they can sign up for that and also about your podcast.
Yeah, so we put all the top news together in a clean email every weekday morning, all the top Texas news in a product we call Must Read Texas. 3,000 Texans subscribe and receive that every morning. You can sign up for a free 1-week trial at mustreadtexas.com. My podcast is called Mac on Politics. It's available in the iTunes Store, on Stitcher, on Spotify, on Google Play, and on the web at maconpoliticspodcast.com. I was in D.C. last week and interviewed two sitting United States senators at the same time, Senator Mike Braun of Indiana and Senator Rick Scott of Florida, the former governor. You can check out that conversation.
Very nice. Matt, as always, appreciate your time, and we'll visit with you next week.
Thanks, Chad. Take care.
Have a good one. That's Matt Mackowiak here on the Chad Hasty Show.